Hi, everybody. Welcome to our session today. My name is Angelica. I'm one of the co-leaders of the Women in Automation People Unity Council here at UiPath. So we're really excited to hear from some amazing women who have had some career pivots in their lives. As UiPath is currently going into our Act Two with Agentic Automation, we're also going to hear from these bold career pivots. So, just a quick intro of what we're going to discuss today. We're going to obviously talk about the introductions of the ladies you'll hear from. We'll also be answering questions throughout the panel, so you can kind of listen throughout and include your questions in the chat, please. We will have time at the end for Q&A. And any comments or questions or insights that you have, please pop them in the chat, and then we'll have a chance at the end again to get to them. Here are the people you're going to hear from today. Meet the UiPath team. I'm actually going to pass the mic over to Maggie, who's going to be our facilitator for the session. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Angelica. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, also echoing initial sentiment for joining. We're thrilled to be here. We're thrilled to hear from some very talented and seasoned UiPathers who have a lot of great stories and advice to share with you all. My name is Maggie Walder. I'm the Senior Director of Customer Success within our Healthcare and Life Sciences vertical. I've been with UiPath for over 2 years, and I'm deeply passionate about and invested in the connectivity and the support of women in the professional sector and specifically in technology. I'll jump in and start introducing our 4 panelists here, and then we will kick into Q&A with the group. So starting off, we've got Marna Carroll on the line. Marna is a director of product support operations and is also the chief of staff for the Senior Vice President of Global Support. Marna started her career as a learning and development specialist and assumed a number of different roles under a number of different teams, but has ultimately positioned herself as an operational leader. She came to UiPath running global training programs and is now in her chief of staff role. She's instrumental in turning leadership vision into clear priorities and action. Fun fact about Marna, she and her husband just bought a pair of e-scooters and are now scooting all over town, finding new bike trails and paths. I actually just recently tried e-biking for the first time. Fantastically fun. For those of you who haven't done it, would give it a big shout out. So Marna, over to you for a moment. Just to say hello and kick us off, what would you say is the worst or hardest job you've ever had?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Just a shout out to the e-bike and e-scooter fans. Like, give it a go. It is so fun. Yeah. Anyway, ping me on the side if you have questions. We're just getting into it. But hardest job I ever had is really related to one of my career pivots as well. So I'll probably talk a little bit more about this later. But about midpoint in my career, my first daughter was born, or my first child was born. And I had an opportunity to go move out of L&D into an L&D space as a consultant at Microsoft. What I didn't know moving into a small consulting firm was that L&D was just part of what they did. And so as I got into my first set of assignments, I found out that I was also going to be a SharePoint administrator and a Scrum Master and a technical manager and a release writer and all of these other things that kind of came along with being a consultant. And that was probably the hardest thing that I'd ever done because I had to kind of move out of the space of being really comfortable in what I was doing in L&D, having had done that for about 6 years, and now into a space where I had no idea what I was doing, but had some related skills that helped me along the way. And I think that job was the one that prepared me for all other jobs that followed.
Many, many hats you were wearing, it
Yes,
sounds like. Never a dull moment.
absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks, Marta. Welcome. All right, our next panelist is Sarah Abbott. Sarah is a technical account manager under our public sector vertical. Sarah initially spent the first 24 years of her career as a flight attendant and purser for Delta Airlines, where she led cabin crews and handled just about any challenge midair. I can only imagine the stories that you've got there. After becoming a mom in 2015, she realized it was time for a change and started looking for work that felt more stable but still challenging. So she ended up jumping over into coding in 2021 and thus moved into the world of technology. For the past 3 years, she's been helping customers build and manage their agentic automations in that technical account manager role. Fun fact about Sarah outside of work, she's an avid traveler and skier and former distance runner and a very proud boy mom. So she's figured out how to combine a number of those passions and loves to take her son on big adventures, spanning from Costa Rica to Paris to all over the US. So Sarah, welcome and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Fun question for you to start. What was your very first job?
My first job was a salad bar attendant, which is very glamorous, working at Wendy's. And they didn't even trust me with running the cash register. So all I
Oh,
could do was manage the salad bar. So yeah.
lettuce was your domain. Stay
Yes.
there. I loved that Wendy's salad bar for what it's worth. So appreciate your service there. All right. Moving over to our third panelist, Holly Tripp. Holly is a principal customer success leader under UiPath's Summit vertical. Holly began her career in software sales right out of college, landing at Oracle and later Salesforce, and then opted to take about a 10-year hiatus from paid work to focus on what I would call the most challenging job of them all, unpaid work of raising children and her family. At some point, Holly pivoted back into the workforce and returned to the world of software sales, spent a good amount of time there, but then ultimately pivoted once again and moved into a customer success role where the rest is history. Outside of work, Holly volunteers quite a bit and she's involved in the UiPath Foundation. She's actually headed to Romania later in the year through that foundation to support and run a camp for underprivileged kids. So thanks, Holly, for being here. Holly, same question over to you. What was your very first job?
Well, my first job. Uh-oh, and I froze. Did I freeze for you guys?
You froze, but you're good. You're back
Okay.
now.
My first job and my worst job was just a mere 2 days at Marie Callender's. I was just 15 years old, and I loved Marie Callender's mac and cheese and I think Caesar salads. And it's all a blur now because in those 2 days it was so greasy, so disgusting. Nobody trained me. I thought I was going to slip and fall to my death every time I moved, even though I had those nice little restaurant shoes. So after 2 days, I didn't return to work, and I'm not even sure I reported in that I wasn't going to be coming back. I think I made some
Wow.
announcement when I walked out.
No call, no
Um,
show.
and I
Yeah.
also sadly never went back to Marie Callender's again.
Wow, you were scarred for life, but you got to start somewhere.
But
Great.
you got to start somewhere and know what works and what doesn't.
Exactly. Exactly. Thanks, Holly. All right, and then our last, last but not least, panelist that we have today is Julie McDonald. Julie is also a customer success manager supporting UiPath's healthcare and life sciences vertical. She's a peer of mine. Julie began her career as a registered nurse, actually, with a really deep commitment to women's health, specializing in high-risk obstetrics in the labor and delivery unit. For the past 13 years, Julie has been running at her Act 2 and channeled her clinical experience and insights into healthcare technology optimization. Outside of work, you can find Julie spending time with friends and family, including her very busy adult son and her less busy dog. She also likes to keep her nursing skills somewhat fresh through various channels of volunteering and has some very great wild stories from her nursing days. We'll also share in passing that she's participated in over 10,000 births in her career, which is pretty phenomenal. So thanks, Julie, and welcome. Same question over to you, Julie. What would you say was the worst or hardest job you've ever had?
Well, I count myself pretty fortunate because even my worst job was not that terrible. But probably my worst job was my first job, which I worked at a walk-up ice cream stand when I was about 14. I was very, very short. I was very, very scrawny, and the large top-loading freezers were very, very big. So to get to the back tubs, I had to kind of hop up, hook my hips over the edge of the freezers and reach. So I spent an entire summer up to my armpits in ice cream. And the worst part was I could not eat ice cream for several years after that. So that kind of turned me off, much like Marie Callender's. I was a
Sorry.
just say no to ice cream for quite a while.
I bet your arm muscles were looking pretty cut though, coming out
They
of
were,
that
they
summer
were,
job.
yeah, I got a little bit, not as buff as I got wrestling around poor pregnant girls with epidurals, but yeah,
Yes,
I did
yes.
pretty well.
Yeah, it set you up physically for the
It
demanding
did, it
the
did.
demands of nursing. I'm just imagining you falling into that freezer and your legs kind of dangling up top.
It,
Thank you for
it,
that
it,
mental image.
it
Yeah,
would, yeah, it happened.
yeah. All right, thanks all. Let's go ahead and jump into it. So, Julie, since you are off mute, I will start with you.
Sure.
If you were to think back to one of your biggest kind of directional shifts or pivots in your career, what's the story behind one of those biggest examples that you'd point to? And what was the lead up to it? Was it intentional and planned, or was it somewhat organic in retrospect?
So my big pivot was probably my only pivot, which was moving from um, hands-on bedside nursing into healthcare technology. It was something, doing something else was sort of in the back of my mind. I love my job. I miss patient care every day, but there was so much in the healthcare space that was changing, that was um, pulling clinical staff away from the bedside and into more administrative sort of roles. And it was, I felt like a disservice to not be able to give my patients the care that I felt they deserved, or to be able to care for my patients the way I felt I deserved to do that. And I didn't want to wait till the point that I was getting bitter about how, how things were progressing. So I was sort of thinking in the back of my mind of what else I could do, how I could leverage, my current nursing skills into something else. And I got an out of the blue call from a recruiter asking if I would be interested in being a workflow sort of optimization leader for a company that had a software product for maternal fetal medicine ultrasound reporting. So I kind of applied, and it sort of went that way. And as I continued in that position, we acquired more and more medical imaging products. So then I ended up being kind of the go-to person for all the clinical imaging products that we had in healthcare organizations globally, everything outside of radiology. So we had lots of people who did radiology, and then all the imaging that happened out of radiology was kind of me.
That's great.
So it was
I think
pretty.
that's a good example of, in some ways, the stars aligning and the timing working out, but in others, a theme that we'll likely hit on throughout the course of the next hour is just the concept of transferable skills. So you taking all of this experience and all of this skill set that you've acquired over a certain number of years and repackaging it into a different role, a different seat, but all of that experience is highly relevant into like a new arena that you're moving into. So great example there. Thank you. I'll open it up to the rest of the group. Can anyone else jump in and talk through one of their biggest pivots and how you got to that point, how it came to be?
Well, I'll go since I'm off mute and just jump right in here. Actually, I have two pivots, which we'll talk about the move from unpaid work to paid work maybe later. But my pivot from sales to customer success was just kind of a really practical one. I had re-entered the workforce. I was right back in the software sales gig, without missing a beat. And I was at a company that was pre-IPO. And after 2 years of selling to my customers, there was a lot of kind of drama going on within the sales organization, some kind of cultural and leadership things that I wasn't really that comfortable with. But I wasn't ready to leave this pre-IPO company, my vesting, my customers, the promises that we'd made to them. And customer success was the perfect place to go. I could continue to like service those same customers and making good on the promises that I had made as their salesperson. So I kind of pitched this to both leaders, both my sales and my CS leaders. So I didn't burn any bridges. I didn't make anyone think I didn't really like them, that this was just in the best interests of the company and our customers. It was such a natural move. And it was frankly a lot of fun. And once I got there and I was having so much fun, the rest was, like you said, history. So the shift was really perfect. It also was great timing with my preteen kids who seemed to need a lot more attention, and that the spikes and troughs of sales kind of smooth out a little bit with CS. So the stress level is still just as chaotic, and but it's a little bit more predictable. So it fit real nice with my personal life too.
Good answer. Thanks, Holly. Great insights there. Sarah, I'll ask the same question over to you. What was your biggest career pivot that you'd point to, and how did you get there?
So people always ask me, how do you go from being a flight attendant to a technical account manager? It's kind of a big difference. But I was always the flight attendant that was interested in understanding technology, and other flight attendants would come to me with questions about, our software or whatever, we had an iPhone we had to use, that kind of thing. So I was always drawn to that. I always wanted to work with the technology, understand it. I got involved with a ski club where they needed a website, and I'm like, sure, I can build that, and just learned how to do it. So it was something that I was always interested in, but I kind of treated it like a hobby. But when I became a parent, I realized that this job wasn't working for me anymore the way it was when I was just a single person. And so I started to see it as like, okay, this is an opportunity for me to try something that would, give me more uh, flexibility, more stay at home with my son time, that kind of thing.
Yes, I
Mhm.
love that. And I think that's a good point. As you move through your career, starting to hone in on activities and areas that truly interest you and you think you're good at, and then running toward opportunities that map to those interests and skills. So great example of a rebrand there. Marna, I'll kick it over to you also just to open up your story around your biggest career pivot and how you got to that point as well.
Sure. Yeah, I'll tag on to a couple of themes I'm hearing here as well. I had spent probably about the first, 6 to 8 years of my career in customer service types of roles. I had been working my way through college as a telephone representative for a wireless company and loved that job, but never thought it would be kind of my end job. I graduated though and um, was a supervisor at the call center and thought, hey, I'm doing things. But one day the learning and development leader came to me and said, like, what are you doing here? And why aren't you in, in L&D? And I had a communications degree and new media studies, and I was like, well, I don't know what to do with my degree, and so I'm loving this job. And she said, well, I always see you doing these types of things. You're always the person we, come to for training or documentation or whatever. Why don't you come and meet with my team and see what we do? Well, that launched kind of that first career pivot of helping me define, what I love doing. I spent the next 6 years in L&D jobs. I followed her from this wireless company to Starbucks, fell in love with Starbucks and their culture. But then I started having kids and we started growing our family, and the Starbucks commute wasn't working for me anymore. And so that's when this consulting job came along. And I didn't realize I was making a career pivot at the time. I thought, oh, I'm going to go do this same L&D type of work, but at a consulting company, and it'll be a different way to look at this type of work and interact with customers and serve as a consultant in a different scope. In my intro, I alluded to like, well, that turned into a whole host of different jobs that I got to do over the next 8 years. I really learned to love this consulting job and operating in a consulting function. And so I just started raising my hand to say yes to different jobs. And that's how I got thrown into some of the other things that led me to, other career pivots where I eventually went back to more of a corporate environment at T-Mobile. And then here was another kind of career pivot. I took kind of a leap of faith in joining UiPath. I wasn't looking for a job when, people reached out to me and said, hey, come here. But my kids were at a different age and it was time to kind of make a change. And so that just kind of led to, that saying yes to new things and new experiences has led to a couple of unintentional career pivots. And now in my current role as Chief of Staff and Director of Support Operations, I think that was the most intentional career pivot that I ever had made. Spending, 20 years in really in an L&D type of space with, a few tangents. I'd really come to love the operational piece of it and the leadership piece of it and the strategic piece, and saw how L&D really did prepare me to help leaders do some of their operational work in different ways. And so I lead conversations now in different ways. I approach work in different ways than maybe some other operational leaders do because of that background. But career pivots are things that happen in our life and take us in different directions. I think we just have to be open to seeing where those things go.
Totally resonates with me, and I'm hearing a lot of similar concepts in terms of openness, flexibility, and being creative to pursue work that really fits into your life, not the other way around. So really good examples there. And that's also why I asked around whether the pivots were intentional or organic, because sometimes, especially if the pivot happens within the same organization, you can look back and you ended up in a spot where you didn't necessarily intend to be, but a happy accident. So
Absolutely.
on that note, Holly, I wanted to come back to a statement that you made around being in the same org and moving from a sales position into customer success. I think there's a lot of work and a lot of wins that need to happen leading up to that point, so that you're seen as someone who can move into uncharted territory or something new, and you have the ability and the wherewithal to figure it out. So how did you build a brand leading up to that point where you'd be flagged as someone appropriate to move into a new role without that direct experience?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I don't know if I just got lucky. But you're right. It did take a lot of wins along the way. I mean, frankly, my initial career in software sales before I took a 10-year break as a mom, had its own series of pretty cool successes. I had a lot of opportunity just going into, say, Salesforce as employee. I think it was around 375 at the time. There were just so many great opportunities that you could really wrap yourself around and brand. So I think thinking about your successes, even in those early years in my 20s, and really trying to brand myself early on, I was able to take that and still have that live on when I re-entered the workforce after 10 years. So you're right. It is, kind of making sure you recognize your successes, but know your value. Present those successes. You have experience just by being in the workforce with every year, every experience under your belt, no matter what the career is. Those are your lived experience. And so really taking ownership of that and knowing your value so that you can pivot back and present it. I mean, I obviously had those sales skills and I used those in my pivot, pitching to my leadership as to why I should make this change. Recognizing those value points along the way, I think was a key thing I did that I wasn't even aware I was doing so much until I really needed them.
It's such a good call out in terms of know your value. I think to double down on that, really being intentional around cataloging your wins. So you've got that running list of like hard accomplishments you've worked through. That serves you twofold, really driving your internal confidence as you continue to take on more, and also gives you really good data points if and when you're in a position where you need to advocate for yourself and articulate why you are deserving of something new or something bigger. So knowing your value and cataloging your wins, I would say, big takeaway for today. All right. Julie, back over to you. Really interesting and bold career pivot. And Sarah, I would also call you out under this category in that you made really a kind of almost a 180 in terms of jumping at a new opportunity. So how would you, what's the work that you did leading up to that point in terms of risk taking that gave you the comfort level in moving into something very new and unknown?
You want me to go first, Sarah? I think, because mine was not something that I necessarily was intentionally driving towards. It was a little, I had a lot of trepidation. It was a very different career. I had always worked night shift for 25 years. I'm a night owl. I worked at night. And I worked 12-hour shifts, which were usually 14-hour shifts. I worked weekends. So things that other people think, oh, that'd be great. You don't have to work nights and you don't have to work weekends. But, I was used to doing a lot of my stuff during the week when everybody else was working. So there are a lot of parts of that change that were, I thought long and hard before I did make that jump. But, it was really just a matter of determining where I wanted to go and, could I continue in the career, that path that I was in and continue to be happy, even though I loved it. And, if I could go back to that in a same kind of way, I might, I can't now because I've been away from it too long. It's a very physically demanding job, and I don't know after so many years to go back to it. But it was something that I loved doing, which made it much more difficult to make that leap with so many challenges as far as change in my lifestyle. But um, I was lucky enough to have a fallback. If it did not work out, I could always go back and be a nurse. But that was not my plan. But there is a comfort level in that, I have to say. But yeah, it was exciting and I was ready to try something new. So that's what I did. I took a leap and it worked out.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie. Sarah, how would you say that you leaned into risk taking and got prepped to take that big jump?
So I would say the difference between like the nursing career and a flight attendant career, um, if you leave the flight attendant career and you come back, you start over. So you don't get to come back where you were as a senior flight attendant. You come back as a new flight attendant, brand new, the first year pay, all of that, having all your weekends where you're flying, that kind of thing. So that was a huge risk, knowing that I can't come back. So it took me a while. It took a few years. I did the first coding boot camp I went to was in 2017. And it took me a few years to get brave enough to like, okay, I got to do this. I need to change. Um, so 2020 during COVID is when it started to hit me that like, this is just not working. And they offered a early retirement package at the airline, and I'm like, this is it. This is my chance. I can do this. I'm going to take the jump, take the leap, and I did. I took a buyout, and then I did a second boot camp, and was able to transition into this position with UiPath. So
Think that's huge though that as you were contemplating, you were starting to lay foundation in parallel to train yourself, educate yourself into a potentially new space. So taking those boot camps and getting that formal enablement, I'm certain helped tee you up to actually run at the new role.
yeah.
Call out. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Okay, so I saw a similar question that I was planning to ask pop up in the chat, so I'll hit it now. I think at times part of risk taking and part of leaning into newness or discomfort, there has to be an acknowledgement or acceptance that we're going to have hiccups or mistakes or failures, flops. So I'm curious, Marta, I'll kick this over to you. In hindsight, were there any flops or issues or mistakes that you made that were actually big moments of learning and growth that were important in your career? Can you talk about any failures that you'd share?
Absolutely. I'll talk about one that I can laugh about now, but I was not laughing then. And I think it was the SharePoint administrator and developer role that I held at Microsoft. I had done some small jobs for a couple of teams, really cleaning up their space, making sure their, documentation and workflows were all smooth and clean. And so they're like, hey, we want you to come and do this other job for us. We have like 10 sites that we want to collapse into one, and we'd love for you to design a new space for us and organize all of this. Well, it ended up being the biggest SharePoint project I've ever worked on in my life. And those 10 sites came with years of information, and we ended up with over 1,000 pages of content, a handful of custom workflows so to make sure that content was getting approved in the right way, and that we had special rules and routing and all the permissions, everything you can think of we were building into this site. I had never done anything like this before. And so I was learning on the job. And so one of the things that I learned, there was to take ownership of my own learning and to always be curious. And so I rolled up my sleeves and I got into it and I applied a ton of the L&D principles about just how to organize information and content and make it accessible for people. And I was done getting ready to present to everybody and I was making one last tweak to a workflow. And I deleted the whole thing, all of it. Thousands of pages gone, all of the workflows gone, permissions gone. And I just sat there for a moment and I panicked. I really panicked. And so, months of work, I was on this project for about 9 months. Months of work just gone. And so I just had to go back into, okay, what have I learned about administration? And this was back in the day when you had, your separate SharePoint administer site that you had to, kind of do all these things through. So I just kind of started working backwards. So like, what do I know about this problem? This has to be able to be fixed. How are things backed up? And so it ended up, in an hours long conversation with IT, but they were able to restore everything pretty much back to the last action that I had taken. There were a few things to clean up. Um, but that was one of those moments where I had to really think about like, what do I do with this failure? Like, how do I think through this? Because I was, in that panic moment, I was like, that's it, I'm fired. This is it. I got to go find something new. And instead, I turned it around and figured out how to use that story to like tell the team and to tell my, my contract employees that here's what I did and here's how it happened and here's what I want you to learn from this so you don't make the same mistake when I hand this site off to you. So it ended up being a good thing, but it took me some time to really wrap my mind around like, how do I want to feel about this failure? And how do I want to talk about what it means to me and the quality of work that I deliver and what I can learn from it? And, I thought about, well, I can be embarrassed about this forever and never tell anyone. Or I can just be forthcoming and say what's happened and hope that it helps somebody else in the future.
Absolutely. Fail fast and help others fail fast around you too by learning from your mistakes. I love the direction on transparency or openness around that. Holly, I'll kick it over to you. Do you have any anecdotes or stories around either a very challenging scenario that you worked through or a failure to point at that now in retrospect was actually a moment of big growth for you?
Oh, it's a tough question because, like Marna, do you wanna really talk about these hard failures? But yeah, I think I have a classic one for anyone in sales and CS. I got fired by my customer once, a really big, really strategic customer, who was very, very demanding, and in this case, happened to be at a Series A startup where this particular customer was used to dealing with our C-suite because we were only 40 people. Um, and so that, it's kind of made sense that they didn't want just regular programmatic support and sales in that scenario. So I got fired by the customer, but was able to position myself to move into more of a leadership role to help all of our budding newer folks who were also going to have to do the same and reaching out to our very small but all very important customer base and have a programmatic approach with them. So I was able to sort of take that learning and really create a program around how we were going to approach other customers so we didn't repeat the same problem. That same customer remains extremely demanding and the same, and will probably fire just about anybody all the time just to have the C-suite take care of them. So we'll just leave that aside. But it really is a good lesson. And the fact that we're all going to face those kinds of big failures and sharing them, like Marna said, so that we can learn from them.
Yes, the universal experience of working through those moments. And sometimes, as a side, maybe it's ultimately not personal. Maybe that's more of a thematic situation happening at that customer. Thank you, Holly, for sharing. Sarah, I'll jump back over to you. Having worked through some of the risk taking, having worked through some of the career pivots and leaning into new and uncomfortable areas, what's the general mindset or mantra that you live by now in regards to how you approach your career?
Just trying to keep a growth mindset that that you're always learning. There's always something to learn. And I think, especially with how UiPath, the product is always changing. So I can't, I have to tell myself it's okay that I don't have all the answers. I need to, be open to the idea that, I'm gonna not know the answer and have to get someone else to help me answer that question. But yeah, just I'm always learning. There's always something to learn.
I love that. Yeah, and that actually hits on a topic we'll jump over to in a minute in regard to leveraging your professional support system. But I'll jump back over to Julie. Same question to you now that you've survived some of your professional war wounds. What's the general mantra or mindset that you live by thinking about your professional path? Julie, it looks like you're on mute. Heads up.
There I was. So I have kind of a different perspective from my switch. So my first thing is when things get crazy or stressful, I have to remind myself that no one's bleeding to death. So that always kind of resets myself. And then I think having such a big switch that it worked out well for me, but as long as you have a goal that you're working towards. And for myself, my main goal was to take care of the folks that, are my people, those people who struggle in the healthcare space because the technology that's being created for them does not work for them. And so how do I try to support them and make their job easier, make taking care of patients easier and go from there. And if you do that, generally, I found that everything falls into place. And I figure if it doesn't fall into place, then that's not a place that was meant for you. And that's okay. And so maybe it's time to find something else. And I think that's one of the supporting rules of pivoting like that. So not every role was meant for everybody. And if it's not something that's worked for you, then sometimes you just have to find something that does.
100% agreed. Back to that concept of flexibility and creativity. Keep going. Marna, back over to you for a moment. You've moved around in different positions within a number of different organizations. So how did you leverage your professional ecosystem or your community, your network, whatever term you'd like to use, to help you get positioned to pursue new opportunity?
That's such a great question. And it's rooted in something that I know about kind of myself being more of an introverted person is that I really have to focus on building a network. And so it's something that I actively think about pretty regularly because I have to encourage myself to stretch out of my comfort zone, to meet new people and to ask questions and to get involved in different things. But in doing that throughout my career, it's helped me meet so many people that has allowed me to make the connections of like, oh, the work that I do here could be helpful there. Or it's opened doors for people to come and seek me out and say, hey, I have this opportunity. Would you be interested? Or what do you know about this space? And so having a professional network that you're just nurturing all the time is so important because you never know when an opportunity is going to present itself or who's going to be thinking about you for a certain role. The other part of that, though, too, is, in during COVID, we all kind of moved to this remote space and had to figure out how to work and lead remote teams, and that really led to a lot of isolation for people. And so coming out of that, it really had me really thinking bigger about my network and how I used them. And so I started just talking to people about challenges I was facing and asking them questions about, are you facing similar things? And trying to find common ground so that I wasn't, struggling with the same questions over and over by myself, but really leaning into my network to see like, what are your experiences? And just being curious about people, and curious about what they're going through to try and, find connections and draw bridges. But I'll wrap kind of all this up to say that you can't lead necessarily or find success in your career alone. And so, it's when you are vulnerable and it's when you are willing to talk about the tough things in your career or the hard things that you're facing or the things you're struggling with and you trust your network with that stuff is really when you find growth and where you find opportunity.
That's a huge piece of this, bringing authenticity and vulnerability into your professional life. I read a stat somewhere that when men are considering leaving a role and leaving a company, they talk to at least 8 other people about that. And on the flip side, women tend to talk to up to 2 people about that. So they kind of suffer in silence,
Yeah,
keep their thoughts and feelings to themselves. And then instead of either being able to rectify or move past it, they do end up exiting at a much higher rate than men. So just being comfortable bringing your authentic self and your authentic experience to your work life can actually yield a lot of very real gains.
absolutely.
Um, Holly, same question over to you. How, and especially moving into UiPath, somewhat more recently than some of the others here, how have you built and then leveraged your professional network or ecosystem to excel?
Yeah. Well, it's that professional network that got me here in the first place. It was a post on LinkedIn actually, from another awesome customer at another company I was at, that kind of got some of my network talking and created an awesome conversation about my opportunity here at LinkedIn. I mean, at UiPath rather. So, just the simplest things, leveraging your network and communicating and knowing those successes and promoting them, promoting your brand. It doesn't have to be like self-advertisement. It's really just being out there and being present, where those conversations turn into opportunities. So, yeah, that's it's
Great
really
answer.
important to keep that network going for sure.
Very much. So thank you. Um, all right. Going to jump over and talk through taking skills that you've learned from a previous position and applying them into something new or different. And I saw a group question come through in the group chat around overcoming, being a veteran in one seat or one place and moving back into more of a novice situation. So Sarah, over to you in terms of moving from kind of the customer service delivery space in the airline industry over into customer service technology space at UiPath. How would you say you leveraged your previous skills to be successful in your current role?
I think one of the big things is being able to empathize with the person you're talking to and not put your own, feelings into something. Just hearing them, understanding what they're saying, and trying to find solutions. Because, sometimes when you're, as a flight attendant, you're in the air and it's just up to you to find the solution, right? There's nobody to back you up. It's just, what can you do for this customer? And so that has helped me to, with customers now at UiPath, to take responsibility, take ownership of a problem and try and find a solution for them. I'm not like, oh, I don't know, you got to find somebody else to do that. It's my problem. I'm going to find the solution.
I love that. Yeah, just committing to confidence in yourself that you can figure it out or ask for help
Yeah.
where needed. One of my previous bosses and closest mentors had a very interesting, diverse career, and she was saying at one point that she believed that people really often underestimate their ability to move into a new space based on the work and the skill that they've already acquired. So I think that's probably one takeaway we'd reiterate here too is don't undersell yourself, don't underestimate because you've done challenging, highly skilled work in one space. That's a very strong indication that you can do similar, parallel, challenging, highly complex work in another space. All right, I know we're getting close toward needing to open this up for Q&A. So one final question I want to ask each of the 4 panelists, and I will start with Julie. I'll kick it over to you again. What is one bold belief that you now hold about career change? And I guess similarly, to frame the question, if you could talk to your 22-year-old self, what would you tell her about career path and career pivoting?
Oh, bold belief. a bold belief personally is that there are no bad decisions in what you choose to do. And if you choose to pivot and it doesn't turn out the way you want, it doesn't mean it was a bad decision, because there's something that you learn from everyone. And like I said before, just because that specific place wasn't meant for you, it doesn't mean it wasn't an important step in the journey of figuring out what it is you were meant to do. So, you have to reframe sometimes those things in your mind about what you might consider successes and failures are just steps along the way, and it's okay. And everybody takes a journey that ends up in different spaces, and like all of us here, certainly in spaces we didn't really anticipate we would be at our 22-year-old self. So I think it's just, everything is okay. And much like Marna said, just being open and vulnerable and willing to open yourself up to others to learn, and also to help others along the way, and support other people that, as you learn things, to bring people along with you.
Great. Yeah, avoiding the urge to catastrophize when things don't quite work out as you anticipated, and keep going. I love that message. Holly, over to you. What's one bold belief you now hold about career change, and what would you tell your 22-year-old self?
Well, my belief I learned when I was in my mom career. I heard a professor speaking about how much longer we're all living. We're all going to be probably living 100-year lives. And she said career changes are actually going to be the expectation. How could you possibly live like we used to, where you had your education, you had your career, you had your retirement? We're living too long for that. So career change and what we're talking about today really should be the expectation, not
Yeah.
an exception.
Yes.
And knowing that probably everyone's going to go through it at some point in their lives gives you a little bit of comfort in knowing that you're making this change whenever you're making it that's right for you. Probably everyone you're working with. And then also, we talked about the men and talking. It was the dads who were the most supportive in my going back to work. The professional fathers out there who saw, what I was embarking on in their own wives potentially in the future. So they were great consults when I went from being at home back to the working world.
Great shout out to all our male allies. Yes. Wonderful, Holly. Thank you. Marna, over to you. What's one bold belief you now hold about career change, and what would you tell your 22-year-old self?
Each career move you make is only as scary as the stories you tell yourself.
Mm.
Because, the current move that I most recently made is into this chief of staff role, and it's probably the biggest job that I've ever had. Doesn't mean I'm not qualified to do it though. And so it's really, and I just put an answer to Andrea in the chat about, how do you, move from being an expert to a novice? I feel like that's what I've been doing this past year in my current role. And it's doing an honest self-assessment of where I'm at, and staying grounded in the experience that I bring to the role. Like the value, going back to Holly's question, the value I add from my previous experiences, what prepared me for where I am now. And so I just kind of have to lean in that. Like it's only as scary as I make it.
Love that. That feels like a mic drop moment for me. Good line there, Marna. Thank you. All right, Sarah, over to you. Same question. One bold belief you hold about career change, and what would you tell your 22-year-old self?
One thing I would say is growth doesn't happen if you stay comfortable.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to step out of that comfort zone and just take that chance. And what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, that's where the magic happens.
So true.
Agreed. Agreed. Great point. All right. Thank you all so much for the time and the insights. Angelica, kicking it back over to you. I think we wanted to open it up to the group. Hoping you monitor chat. Do we have any questions in the chat that we have not yet hit?
So we had one from Rachel that came in a little earlier. We talked a little bit about it, but if anybody has anything else you want to discuss, what were your biggest challenges that you had faced during your career changes, and how did you navigate them? And this could also potentially be a part of Andrea's question as well. How did you overcome the knowledge gap from being a veteran in your previous career and then a novice in your new one?
Well, I can say And that was one of the biggest challenges for me. I went from being the person that everyone came to being the person who knew nothing and had no idea. I didn't understand corporate culture. I didn't understand org structures of a corporation. I didn't understand any of that. But what I had to keep reminding myself is that I had a skill set and I had a knowledge set that no one else there had. And there was a reason why I was there, and there was a reason why they hired me. And I had to keep reminding myself that that skill set was important to everyone else, and that I would learn the things that I didn't know. And, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's a mindset that you have to put forth, and you'll get there.
I would also say too, moving out of more of an expert seat into a different new role. If the new role, you've got 10 core responsibilities, and coming in, maybe you're really good and comfortable with only 4 of them, then do those 4 areas really, really well, like lean into the foundations of what you already know and excel there. And then for the other 6 where you're still learning, I think it's really important to think through who around you either knows how to do those 6 things, who's good at them, and then get close to those people, shadow them, ask them questions, ask for help, and that can only accelerate your ramp up time to get more comfortable in those 6 areas too. So just thinking about, what am I already good at? What can I do today? Where do I have gaps? And then do some analysis and some planning around, how am I going to really run at the new skill set so that I can get there as fast as possible.
Definitely. Great advice from you both. Thank you. And I think you kind of already answered this one as well in those responses, but this is from Lacey. What strategies have you found to be the most effective for managing self-doubt, imposter syndrome during these incredible career growth opportunities, building from your network and learning from your failures?
Anybody want to jump on that one?
Is a pretty common thing, and immediately went back to Maggie's comment of like, men talk to 8 people, women talk to 2, and it's because I think that imposter syndrome is running kind of rampant in your mind at that time. And so I think one, awareness is kind of that first step, but 2, then lean into your network and be vulnerable and talk about what you're struggling with. I had a really great conversation with a woman the other day, a colleague, about imposter syndrome. And as we started to break it down, she started to realize that she was driving that feeling more than anything else. And so it's just a willingness to be open and talk to people about, kind of where you're at and the help that you need.
Yeah, when I went back, when I decided I was going to go back to work after 10 years off, and I did that because I was doing like an ungodly amount of volunteer work, fundraising and events and so forth. And I'm like, I need to get paid for this work. So I was doing a lot, and actually started those conversations with other, who really in my network, who are now fathers in my community, who are benefiting from a lot of that fundraising work, and talking to them. And they were able to reflect back to me like, no, this is totally normal. They took away some of those doubts. And then one step led to another. One guy introduced me to his buddy who was a recruiter. And that recruiter helped really make it tangible. He's like, if he's going to put me out there and sell me, he was saying, here's what I would say, and here's why I think it's worth it. Gave me that reflection back. And so just kind of one step after another. And then the next step I took was going back to my network. I went to my old boss. We sat down for lunch, and he said, you probably don't want to come back to Salesforce. It's not quite what you left, and he just, and he's like, and he suggested at that time, at that point, it was the Salesforce, ecosystem and network of partners. So it was an easy transition. It was a place I actually was quite comfortable. And man, after 1 year back, it was almost like the world had forgot that I had taken any time off.
Right.
So a lot of those fears were forgotten. Everyone is so busy with everything in their own world and their own requirements and goals that, as long as you're showing up and delivering skills and value, that's what's most important. You're in the moment.
Definitely. Thanks so much. We also had a question. I know things can get fast and furious at times. How do you pause and reflect? Is there a right way?
I think everybody has their own way of doing that. For myself, it's getting away and traveling and getting to someplace new where I'm out of the confines of this room that I spend so much time in, and just change in environment really does help myself personally reflect and think about where I am and where I want to go next.
I don't think there's a right way to do it, but I think it's important that you do it. And we all do annual performance reviews, and you look back at your work and your accomplishments and what you're going to be focusing on in the next year. And important for that type of cycle to not be a check the box exercise, but really take stock of how did I grow, what did I accomplish, and where do I want to go next. And so as long as you're doing that in some type of iterative ongoing fashion, I think you're ahead of the game in terms of bringing intentionality and thought into how you're shaping your career moving forward.
Definitely.
Yeah, I heard
And
somebody
this one,
say
yeah,
yes.
sorry.
There was a good mantra is say yes. And that's how I ended up saying yes to the UiPath Foundation and heading off to Romania later this summer to work for a week at a camp. Just and that will be that kind of breakaway and mindset clearing, intentional. But it was just from saying yes. So, saying yes in both your career and things that are related to your career open those new doors of opportunity. And also, I think give you a little bit more depth and perspective amidst maybe the spiral of our particular role.
Yeah. Just on Holly's point there, I love to recruit and hire what I call hand raisers. So people who maybe you don't totally know how to do it, or it's a little ambiguous in terms of what the ask is, but I'm going to raise my hand, I'm going to try it, and we'll see how it goes. So don't be afraid to volunteer and just put yourself out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think we have a last question here from Reese. Hello, did any of you feel any external pressure to reassess your career plan due to taking time off to raise/spend time with your family? It sounds like majority of you made a pivot to better suit yourselves and your interests and your needs, but curious if you felt any other focuses pressure outside of your personal interests.
Well, yeah, I mean, I got direct pressure, financial pressure, just worry a little bit, of the expectations like, hey, if you're ever going to go back to work and you've taken this much time off, you better get going now. These voices were in my head. So definitely had those pressures. Yep. Yep. And I listened to them. But I also think that, I also gave myself license to reflect on multiple career changes as well. So that's kind of where my second pivot came in, right? So I listened to those voices. I said, all right, let's do it. We're doing this. And went back into sales. And then, I listened to my own personal voice about accepting change and moved into CS, which I found gave me a lot more opportunity for growth, career, and lifestyle. So sort of the all-encompassing package.
Awesome. Well, thank you all very much for sharing your stories. I know we're at time. Thank you, participants, for being here in our audience, and our panelists, and Maggie for facilitating, and Diana for the community team. Um, that's pretty much what we have for today. So
Okay.
thank you
Thank
all
you
so
so much.
much.
Thank you, Angelica. Thanks
Thanks,
all.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.
Bye now.